And we are live. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be around the world. It is a warm, sunny day here in Northwest Detroit. And so to all of you across all platforms, let us know where you are and what the temperature is like there. And welcome to Friday's edition of HR Passions. Passion Fridays. As I have promised since we begun this about 7 weeks ago, I promised to bring you extraordinary, exceptional humans living in the center of their passion. And this week we have certainly not failed in accomplishing that. I think you will be grateful to have tuned in to meet our guest this morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. And let me tell you a little bit about our guest, but I will start saying this, that I made her acquaintance in person one time. And from that time until now, her riveting story has been in my heart. There are many things about her story that stand out and I think will resonate with you. But one of them, and I don't want to give away the best part of it in my mind, but if you trust God, trust the process. And I have not forgotten that from that moment until now. She is a fourth generation leader of faith and social justice. She is a child and family advocate. She is a thought leader. She is a public speaker and nonprofit chief executive officer. Jennifer Jones Austin Esquire fights for equity. As the CEO of the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies, she leads poverty fighting, policy, and advocacy efforts to strengthen and empower the disenfranchised and marginalized communities. She is a sought after public speaker who appears regularly on television and radio and at community events, faith gatherings, and professional convenings. She guest hosts the nationally syndicated radio program Keeping It Real with Reverend Al Sharpton and the cable program Brooklyn Savvy. And she was born and raised in New York City. There's a long list of things that I want to share, so many things about her background, her work, her passion to help children especially. And as a part of that, prior to going to FPWA, she served as Senior Vice President of United Way for New York City, Family Services Coordinator for Mayor Bloomberg, Deputy Commissioner for the New York City Administration for Children's Services, Civil Rights Deputy Bureau Chief for Attorney General Elliot Spitzer, and Vice President for Learn Now Edison Schools. And I could go on and on and on, and probably will as we go more into our talk with her. But I want to just welcome Jennifer Jones Austin. Thank you so much. I know you're a busy person, and I appreciate your taking time to join us and share with us from what I consider, like I said, I had the pleasure to meet you once when you were the guest speaker at Greater Christ here in Detroit. And from that time until now, your book and your story has resonated with me and just, I think, awakened me to some degree about getting about the business of living in the center of your passion and trusting the process along the way. And so I am so excited and honored to have you here. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, I have only God to thank for gifting me this moment, for you seeing what I believe He's put in me, and then responding to that. And so I thank God for that. And of course, I thank you, but I thank Him first and foremost for giving you vision, for you making this moment possible, and you not, as we say, considering it robbery to lift up somebody else seeking to do God's work. The sun's shining here. I'm in New York City. I'm in Brooklyn, and the sun is shining here, but it shines brighter in my heart for this moment. It really does.
I am beyond honored. I'm just stoked because I hope that people will see your passion and hear your story, and that they will find, as I did, parts of it that resonate with them to say, I should make sure I'm living in the center of my passion, being about living well and being about trusting the process, whatever that process is for me. And I know, reading your book, and everyone should get your book. We'll make sure that they know how to get it. And just reading it, and some of the things that just jumped off the pages to me while going through the process and trying to feel the process, you learn not to be as much in control as your life has kind of taught you to be in control. So I want to just slow it down a little bit and go back. You were trained to be an attorney, a corporate attorney, but you're fourth generation social justice and faith. How did that inform your journey about making the switch from corporate attorney goals to doing the work that you're doing now? So tell us a little bit about the background of your social justice roots.
Absolutely. So my father, grandfather, and great-grandfather were all faith leaders in the Baptist denomination of Protestantism. And they were also social justice leaders, leading marches, leading rallies, leading demonstrations, advocating for services and equity in pay, equity in job opportunity. My grandfather was roommates with Martin Luther King Sr. My father and Martin Luther King Jr., along with about 6 or 7 other persons, founded the Progressive National Baptist Convention, which Dr. James Perkins was a president of. My father was the president of the economic arm, Operation Breadbasket, for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And so, I grew up in a household where I saw my father, as he would put it, speaking truth to power. And as he would say, freedom is the ability to say no to a lie, to veto an untruth. He would say that the faith leader, and often he'd say the preacher, but sometimes he'd say the faith leader is the freest person on earth because his or her allegiance is to God and to no one else but God, and that allows you to be free. And so when you grow up in a household like that, right, where you are seeing a faith leader and other faith leaders just speak what they believe is the will of God, and what they are determined that they are directed by God to do and to say and to speak and to feel. It's just a part of who you are. It's a part of your DNA, how you show up in the world. And then couple that with having a mother who also, both my father and mother grew up in Kentucky. And my mother decided that when she was graduating from high school back in the late 50s, that she wanted a career in the arts. And not in the dramatic arts, but in the visual arts. And she wanted to study art history in college. And they said to her, that's not a career for a Black woman. You can't work in that space. And I watched her over the years build her career and become the first Black person to be the curator of a Fortune 500 corporate art program. I saw her travel the world with millions of dollars annually allocated to her to buy art and to place it in buildings across the country and in other parts of the world. So that then, when you see this and you experience this, and I always talk about the marinating process and exposure, what our children see, what we experience becomes who we are. And so when you see your father speaking truth to power and living his calling, and you see your mother living her passion and her purpose, you wind up feeling like that's what you're supposed to do in this world. Find your passion and work in pursuit of it. And your passion given you by God. So I went to law school not really knowing what I wanted to be. I had an uncle who was an attorney. He said, you don't know what you want to do, go to law school. While you're there, you'll figure it out. And he went on and said, and if you don't, that's okay, because people think lawyers can do anything short of practicing medicine. And I was a chemistry major, so he thought, well, if you wanted to be a doctor, then you'd go to med school. So clearly you don't. So I go to law school, and I happen upon an article about a young man who experienced significant abuse and neglect at the hands of his father. And all of a sudden, my world opened up to appreciating the challenges that many young children experience at the hands of the people who are supposed to be there to love them. And I knew about abuse and neglect. I mean, who doesn't, right? But I did not know in this particular case, the young man had suffered so much trauma, he acted out in a violent way. And I began to appreciate how minds can be traumatized, how your life can be so negatively affected and impacted. And all I wanted to do was to, learn as much as I could about these children and their experiences. And one day I realized God was speaking to me. And he said, I don't need you over there in corporate law. He said, I need you working on behalf of my vulnerable children. Wow. And it was a kind of a tug, because there was money over here. There was good deeds over there, but not necessarily a whole lot of money. Right. But when the Lord speaks to you and he speaks clearly, and he says your steps are ordered, you have to continually pray that you are in a place to see and receive his words, his guidance, his direction. And I just thank God that I was in that place and space where I could see him and hear him speaking clearly to me saying, I need you to work on behalf of my vulnerable children. And so that's been now, goodness, I guess we're going into my 27th year of this work. And I can say that God has blessed me over and over and over. He has just allowed me to move and work and serve and lift up his children and create real impact, bring about greater opportunity on a continuing basis on behalf of his children and their families.
Yeah. And any specific story or lesson that stands out with you in your work with children that you would want to share either early on or as you progress through these 27 years?
Two things. One, I went into this work believing that I was there to help children and lift up vulnerable children. And I looked to persons like Marian Wright Edelman, founder of the Children's Defense Fund, just, a force of nature, African-American woman, Spelman graduate who went on to found her own, nonprofit policy organization, lifting up the concerns and needs of children. So, she became a role model and a distant mentor. I worked for her at one point. I looked at people like Hillary Clinton, who used her law degree, like Marian Wright Edelman, who used hers to work on behalf of vulnerable children. And so that was the space I was moving in. And I guess maybe I'd say about 4 or 5 years into it, I realized that I could not be concerned only about children, that you can't save and make a difference in children's lives by focusing exclusively on them, and also focusing on them after the trauma has presented. So I worked in child welfare, children being removed from their homes and placed in foster care. And I began to appreciate that we were kind of putting a Band-Aid on the problem, but we weren't solving it. And if we weren't working with their families, who at times were not being the best to them, but it doesn't mean that they weren't good people, just meant that they were challenged too. And I realized that I needed to lean in and work and do more with vulnerable children and their families. So that was a big aha moment. And then that's what took me to stepping out of the space and looking at the issues and the needs that present, for persons who often traumatize, like not everybody who lives in poverty abuses their children, but the stress of poverty can contribute to child abuse and neglect, looking at the experiences of persons who have been victims of domestic violence and how that can play into, like not being the best parent possible. And so I began expanding my understanding and working with other vulnerable communities, appreciating that you got to take care of everybody. So that was one like aha moment. And then I'll quickly share that about 3 years ago, I had another big aha moment. After being in this field for more than 20 years, feeling like I was making impact at the local level, at the state level, at the national level, doing really good work, I was asked to join the New York City Board of Correction, which is the board oversight for our jails. And my first thought was, I don't know anything about the jails in terms of management and oversight and what we should be doing about this or that. Do I know people who've been incarcerated? Yes. Have I had family experiences? Yes. Right. Do I look at it from afar and realize we got a problem concerning mass incarceration of Black people and brown? Yes. But do I know how to manage a jail? No. So I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not contributing to the problem. And then the nudge kept coming. And I realized I had to do it. What I didn't know in that moment, but I quickly learned, was that God was helping to open my eyes, getting me in the jails. I grew to understand that we often think about incarceration as the end of the road, when systems have broken down, when children who've grown up in challenging circumstances and become involved with one system after the next, ultimately, whether it be foster care or, it's not every kid, but let's say it's foster care or homelessness, mental health or whatever, very often they find themselves behind bars. I began to appreciate that what God was helping me to see was that incarceration is not always the end of the road. It can be the beginning of the road for some people. If a parent is incarcerated, a child now is parentless, right? And that child's life now changes dramatically. If an individual is incarcerated and they have partners, right, or a partner, that person now may have the burden of caring for the family and may not have the resources. And what I realized was God was saying, I need you to lean in here, because there's a big part of this puzzle that you don't know enough about. And when I heard him and I leaned in, I realized that in America, we talk about race and justice involvement, but we don't talk enough about race and poverty and justice involvement. And that we need to talk about the trifecta impact, right? Because you can be Black in America and become involved with the justice system, but if you have the resources, and I don't need to mention some high profile cases, right? then the system may work for you, right? But if you're poor, you're at a disadvantage just right out the door. And so that was another aha moment, and just thanking God that, even, as I consider myself mature and more expert than I was 20, 25 years ago, he's still providing, still creating these moments where I can like lean in and learn and feel and realize, no, you got work to do. You got to still build and figure this stuff out. So those are a couple of aha moments.
Wonderful aha moments. And I want to go to 2009, where I think lessons really leaned in for you. And it was, I guess, you were doing two great things. You were helping to plan some activities around the renaming of a portion of the street in honor of your great dad, bless his memory, and also for the surprise 70th birthday for your mom. So take us back to that moment
Okay.
and how that leaned you into a new lesson.
All right. And what I want you and others to appreciate is look at the smile on my face,
Yes.
because the smiling means something, especially as we go through this. So, September 2009, a lot of great things going on in my home. Children are going back to school. I've just completed a really important strategic planning process for my organization. I'm feeling like, we're in good shape. I feel good about where the kids are going to school. We just got to get them back in there. They're going to have a good school year. Work is going to go well. My husband's doing well. And family is like all around me because we're about to celebrate my wonderful mother's 70th birthday. And we're about to rename a street in New York City in honor of my dad. It's a great time.
Mhm.
And so all of this is happening. And I'm at work one day and I'm staying late. I get in a cab to go home and I hear the story about a little girl who's in need of a bone marrow transplant. She has a blood cancer and she is fighting for her life. I hear it over the cab, like they have a radio, like this kind of like whatever you call like a trailer that just keeps going and it tells you about the news and things that are happening. And I immediately think to myself, okay, I want to possibly be a bone marrow donor for her. I need to register, go to an event where they're having a bone marrow drive and register to see if I'm a possible match for her.
Mhm.
And then I start thinking about, what it means to be a match, and that, I'd have to take time off from work, and the kids need me right now because they're going back to school and I got to build out this plan. There are all these things that are happening in my life and she's going to get a donor. I just need to, I need to pray for her and I need to keep going, but she's going to get her donor. She's going to be all right. And God understands she's going to be all right. So that is like, I don't know, maybe it was a Tuesday, Wednesday. I can't remember with certainty, but
Mhm.
just a few hours later, I developed like some feelings where I was like, clammy and nauseous and I couldn't really like take any food in. Several hours later, Friday, like that was like maybe Tuesday or Wednesday. By that, like Friday morning, I wake up and I've got a fever. And I'm thinking, oh, maybe I'm getting the flu. I pop some Tylenol. I start moving through my day. And the fever just, it breaks because of the Tylenol and it spikes again. I come home from work, I get in bed, and I've had to change my clothes because, like, with the fever, I'm sweating profusely. My mother admonishes me. She says, maybe you should go to the doctor. And I'm like, no, it's just a flu. And we've got these weekend activities. We're having a birthday party for her. She doesn't know the party's happening. We've got the street renaming. I don't have time to go to the doctor. I'm just going to sleep off this little like temperature and I'll be all right. Throughout the night, I keep waking up and I'm just sweating profusely. I'm changing my pajamas. Saturday morning comes and the fever's still with me. And at this point, I'm thinking, you know what? Maybe I should go to the doctor. And my husband and my mother say that I should. So I've got to nix the street naming and I've got to go to the ER. I get to the ER and I sit in the ER for hours. And finally, I'm triaged by the end of the day, by like, the end of the afternoon, around 5, 6 p.m. The doctors look at me and they say, looks like you maybe have a like run of the mill virus or something. Just go home and, we're going to give you some Advil and you're going to sleep it off. And in a few days, you'll be all right. So I'm thinking the doctors are telling me it's a virus. I'm good, right? They're doctors. They're the experts. If they say it's just a virus and I can pop some Advil and sleep it off, I'm going to be all right. I always tell people they never checked my blood. Not once did they check my blood. And that's important because your blood and, the white blood count, the red blood count, the hemoglobins can tell a lot about, your health and your well-being. So they didn't check my blood. I go home Sunday. I sleep through the night. I missed the party for my mom. I missed the street naming. Sunday morning comes, the fever's still with me, but they told me it's going to take a little while. So I just try to make it through the day. Monday comes, and I'm still trying to work it through. And I'm laying in bed, napping here and there because the fever's wiping me out. And at one point, I wake up and I cannot see. All I have is like a white blurred, like white blurs. I can't make out anything. And I realize this is not a flu. This is not your typical run-of-the-mill virus. Something else is going on here because I've had a flu. I've had a virus, and I've never not been able to see. I'm like, there's more to this. So I call my doctor, and she says, come on in. I go in to see her the next day because she didn't tell me I had to come in right in that moment. I go in the next day, and she takes one look at me and says, I can't do anything for you. You're in a bad way, and you need to go to the hospital. So now it's Tuesday. I get to the hospital. They begin running a series of tests. And by Wednesday afternoon, I've been admitted, and the doctors come to my bedside, and they say to my husband and me in no uncertain terms, they just look at us and say, you have leukemia. And so it takes me a second or two to process what that is. Like, they're telling me I have cancer. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. They tell me that I looked at them and I just calmly said, so what do we do? That I didn't lose it. I didn't cry. I simply said, so what do we do? And people have asked me here and there, like, how could you be so calm when you get a diagnosis like that? And I'm going to tell you, I think it was my faith. This understanding that if God was going to allow me to go through this, that there must have been more to it. So here's what happens. They tell me I have leukemia. They tell me that they will give me chemotherapy to treat it. And that, with a few treatments, I should be back to normal within 6 weeks. So I'll be inconvenienced. I won't be able to go to work. I won't be able to go to the gym. There are many things I won't be able to do, but it'll just be for a finite period of time. Not what I'd planned, but it'll be okay. Now keep in mind, that little girl who needed the bone marrow transplant, she had leukemia. Mm. So here I am just a few days later learning I have leukemia. I sometimes think, what if I had gone to be tested, to be a bone marrow donor for her? Maybe I would have learned sooner, right? So the doctors say I need chemotherapy. It's Wednesday afternoon. What I can tell you is the next things that happened, I don't know firsthand, even though they happened to me. Mm-hmm. Because the cancer, leukemia, a blood cancer, began moving through my body. It entered my lungs, and my lungs essentially shut down. I couldn't breathe on my own. The doctors put me on a respirator. They intubated me, and that's a form of, as we're now learning with ventilators and what have you. They put me on, they intubated me to help me, assist me with breathing. And they also put me in a coma. And they told my husband that because of the pace, the way the cancer was moving and taking over my body and shutting down my lungs, they said I was going to die. And they told my husband that I was going to die that weekend. So keep this in mind. I start feeling like I have a flu or something on a Friday. Mm. And by that Wednesday, I learn that the next Wednesday I have leukemia. And by that Friday, just 1 week later, my husband has brought my children to the hospital, they are 7 and 12 at the time, to stand in front of a plexiglass window and look at their mother laying in a bed of ice, trying to keep the fever down, with tubes, one big tube down my throat to keep me breathing, and then other tubes stitched to my neck and my throat, giving me IV fluids and also giving me chemo. The doctors believed that I was going to die. They were certain I was going to die. But I thank God that they had the wherewithal to realize that sometimes you don't have all the answers. And sometimes there are other people that God wants you to reach out to and connect with. So they reached out to a leukemia specialist, the leading leukemia specialist in New York City. And they told her about my case. And she said, well, you know what? Why don't you give her some chemo? May not work, but at least we'll learn something. So here's what they did. They gave me the chemo and they prayed with my family.
Wow.
And I always think about that line, in the Bible, faith without works is dead. And they understood that. So they prayed with my family and they administered the chemo. And I survived that bout with leukemia. I came out of a coma 10 days later. And when I came out, I learned what had happened. I didn't know I was asleep the whole time. And one of the things I'm told is that as my sister is trying to tell me everything and I'm trying to take it all in, she points to all the people who've come to the hospital and have had a vigil praying for me while in the hospital, how they flooded the hospital waiting rooms. They bought blankets for people to spend the night. They had people who were bringing food round the clock to keep people who were there fed, not just Doritos and M&Ms, but like fried chicken and barbecue chicken and collards, like they were doing it up. And so she's telling me all this, and I say to her, this isn't about me. And she says to me, yes, it is. They've come for you. And I say, no, this is bigger than me. And so I'm going to take it back to when they first told me I had leukemia. Somehow I knew, because of God, that if he was allowing me to suffer, there was a reason, a purpose bigger than me. And what we found out, is it okay if I keep going, Marcus?
Please.
What I found out was I had a leukemia with a broken chromosome. And because of that broken chromosome, my blood and bone marrow system were permanently damaged. I needed a bone marrow transplant, like the little girl. I needed a bone marrow transplant to help me survive the disease long term because my blood and bone marrow system were now ineffective. They were deficient. And the doctor said that the cancer had been killed by the chemo, but that it would likely return because of the bad bone marrow and blood system. And if I didn't get a new blood and bone marrow system, then ultimately the chemo was going to stop working. We all hear about that. The chemo treatments work, but for so long, and then they're ineffective because your body develops, they become like, it kind of like says, oh, this is what you're giving me again. I'm going to meet that and I'm going to knock it out. So I needed this bone marrow transplant. And the doctor said, okay, it shouldn't be a problem. You've got 3 full-blooded siblings, same mom, same dad. You need what they call similar genetic typing. And so you should have it because you got the same mom and the same dad. My siblings were immediately tested. And when the results came back, they found out that they matched each other, but they didn't have similar genetic typing to me.
Wow.
And it was like, how can that be? We got the same mama, the same daddy. Y'all match each other, but I don't match. God had a plan. God was working something here. So we learned that there is a bone marrow bank, a registry, and that there are more than 8 million people in that registry who at some point in their lives learned of a need for someone. Maybe it was a family member, a friend. Maybe it was just a stranger. They were on a college campus. They were in a work building and a drive was being had. Maybe they'd come out for the little girl who was struggling. But people who'd come forward at another time, 8 million people in the registry who wanted to be bone marrow donors for somebody in need. So the doctors say, we're going to comb this registry, and surely there's going to be a match in there for you. They go to work, they comb the registry, and what happens?
No
Not
match.
one donor, not
Yeah.
one match in that registry for me.
And I want to double back just a second and just say hello to everybody that are on our various platforms. We're talking to Jennifer Jones Austin. And I want to go back a little bit. I think I'm going back. I'm not sure of the chronological, so you'll help me out with this. But in your book, um, uh, you talk a little bit about Dr. Robos. And I wanted one of the thing, I think maybe I said the name right, I'm not sure, but
Robos, right?
Robos, at a part in the book, it's she's saying your consolidation treatment will begin in November. So this is after that initial first scare, and then you're going to need a donor, but they wanted to give you this consolidation treatment, right?
Right.
And you had a ton of questions that you wanted to ask her because you're a person that would be inquisitive,
Right.
a lot of questions. And then this part jumped out at me. I had more questions, you write, and consider it pure joy, which everybody should pick up today. I had more questions, but she interrupted me. Here's how this will work best. Just as I shouldn't hire you as my lawyer and then walk into a courtroom and tell you how to handle my case, you have to let me manage your illness. I am your age and have a son and daughter the same ages as your children. We have to find you a donor so you can raise your children. We will find you a donor. And without further questions or thought, I surrendered my case to her. I never consulted another book, website, or friend on treatment or my chances. Always the one to try to manage and plan every aspect of my and my family's lives. I let it all go. I put my trust in her. I put my trust in God. I released that aspect of my journey. How difficult was that? Because I think people need to understand that it's tough when you are used to being in control and managing. And when you described the planning for your parents' weekend, if you will, how you had kind of did everything to the detail because that's who you were. And everybody knew that's who you were. You were the person that planned, the person in control, the person moving schedules and do all of this. And now you have to surrender that to someone who's saying, okay, now you're going to have to let me handle what I do, and you have to handle your part about getting better to raise children. How difficult was that to do?
So could I just share with you, you have moved me to tears. You have raised a section in the book that people often don't go to. But what you discerned in reading it was that was a pivotal moment, right? And people don't often see that as a pivotal, significant moment. But for the very reasons that you mentioned, it was. And in this particular, and in this now, right, as we're going through COVID and as we're struggling as a nation, and we're feeling like there's so much control that we have, right? We can't come and go as freely as we once did. And now we're confronting all of these other issues with, politics and race matters. You're reminding me in this moment of how that moment helped me to learn how to live in moments like these. How in that moment, I learned to release in a way that I never had. And like having to put my faith and lean on my faith in God, but then also appreciate that God had given me somebody who wanted to hold this for me. And I had to trust. It was almost kind of like, those exercises where they have you fall backward and you got to trust that somebody's going to catch you. I had to trust. And what I had to realize was, I'm so glad that you raised this, Marcus. What I had to realize was the more I held on to it, the greater stress I was causing myself. And when you allow stress in your life mentally, it affects you physically. And so if I was holding all of that stress, then my body was not going to be at ease to receive the treatments that it needed. Right? To just, like if I wasn't allowing myself to just be, then all that tension and that anxiety was going to affect me physically. And so it was like God sent someone to say, let it go. I've got you. And frankly, I'm just going to tell you, here was this woman of Jewish faith, right? A white woman of Jewish faith, very unlike me, but looking at me saying, I got you. And you know what? We're not going to let you die. You can't die. And it was just like she was invested in me. She saw me. She saw my greatest fears. She saw what, I mean, and when I say my greatest fears, I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of leaving those children, right? And she saw that. And she said, I've got you. And so I learned to release. And I will tell you that that was 10 years ago. And I've now been living in that space. I'm getting through COVID because I'm like, whatever God hath in store, then that is what it is. And I can't spend my days worrying what's going to come next. I just got to live in the moment in the way that he desires.
Yes. And I love that you were getting ready to tell us about, there being over 8 million people in the registry and none of them were a match. And the idea came up about doing drives and how the doctors were really discouraging, saying, hey, some of the people that sign up aren't available. And then less than half of those people, even a smaller percentage of the people who do are actually going to be a match. Don't spend your time with that. And I love what your husband said. You said he's normally the pragmatic one. He says, we're doing drives. And
He
I
sure
love that.
did.
That's how it read to me. He was like, whatever they say, that's
Right.
great. We're doing
I
drives.
may have told you all, at church that, it was that moment where you say to yourself, you look back and you say, I know he loves me, but he doesn't like me all the time. And I'm so glad that he was liking me in that moment because he was like, we aren't going to let you die without at least trying.
Yeah.
So.
And so there were drives, I mean, everywhere, a campaign. And
He organized, I mean, it was something to behold. It was a movement. The bone marrow organizations that facilitate these drives, he reached out to them and they said, okay, well, we're going to do like a couple of drives and maybe you'll get 200 people or so. I mean, that's like a high number, but we don't want to get your hopes up too high. And he was like, oh, no, 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 you don't know us. He led with my mother and my siblings and my good friends and the church community across this nation coming along, and black sororities and fraternities and other organizations coming along. My husband led a bone marrow drive or set of drives that resulted in better than 200 drives in less than 13 weeks, with more than 13,000 people being added to the registry to be a donor for me. People who'd never met me, people in like California, in Michigan, in Ohio, in Tennessee, in Texas. I mean, like the list goes on and on. There's a woman who's in need. There's a sister who's in need. We as Black community can help her because we need somebody of similar genetic typing, and you're more likely to match with someone of the same race and ethnicity. And so they were like, we can do this. And they stepped up to join. And then what happened, Marcus, as you know well, these people got tested. They joined the registry, they got tested. And the word came back that not one of them matched me.
Not one out of 13.
Not one.
People. At that point, what were you thinking? What were you thinking?
In all honesty, I was like, God, thank you for allowing me to see that my suffering has purpose. Thank you for allowing me to see that through my suffering, people are learning about the importance of being a bone marrow donor, and people of African descent in particular. Thank you for allowing my children to see that mom's suffering has a value because we're raising awareness. Thank you for helping us to appreciate that other people who are in need of bone marrow transplants are now actually getting donors from people who've come forward for me. So we're seeing that my suffering has purpose. Thank you, Lord, for this, because it's giving us strength and it's helping us to smile and feel like there's a reason for all of this. But I will tell you, Lord and I were having some one-on-ones, and I was like, okay, this is good, but could I get a little bit of bone marrow up in this? Is it possible? And so the fascinating thing is that he saw me, he heard me, he knew what I needed. But as the book tells you, I didn't get a bone marrow transplant, but that's because the Lord had something else for me.
Yes. And in your book, Consider It Pure Joy, I want to pivot a little bit. And another area that really resonated with me is you wanted to be there for your children, and didn't want anyone else to do those special things, though you didn't always have the
Mm.
strength to do it. Sounds like you had an incredible cast of family members, siblings, your mom, husband,
My
and
nieces, nephews, cousins,
nephews,
friends.
cousins. You got to the Thanksgiving holiday, and the reason that resonated with me so, in 2005, I had a brother to pass on Thanksgiving. So
Mm.
Thanksgiving has always been tough. But what your story made me think about is in the moments that you do have, and this is something my mother taught me, take inventory of and be grateful for what you have left, and not just to grieve over what you've lost or what may be. You don't know what the future may be, but what you have right now. And so it resonated with me that you all didn't know whether that was going to be your last Thanksgiving or not, holidays. So you did the things that really mattered, and that resonated with me. So it's just the message in that we take so much for granted, uh,
Absolutely.
with
You know,
family support systems. Yes.
I remember uh, I guess a few months ago now, like when we were just really getting to the throes of COVID, and especially here in New York, where the pandemic was just epic. We were just it was devastating here. I did an event with some women where we were talking about how are we doing in this moment? How are we managing? And at the end of the conversation, uh, the woman who was leading the conversation said, "What do you all want to contribute in this moment?" And when they got to me, I said, "I want to contribute joy." And they were like, "Well, that's interesting." People were talking about, "Oh, I want to, I'm going to do this for my community and I'm going to do that." And I'm like, packing lunches and things like that. And I was like, "Yeah, I want to do that, but I want to contribute joy." And so they leaned into me and they said, "What do you mean by that?" And I said, "I want people to see that even in the midst of your suffering, joy can be found. Good things can be happening, and you need to take stock of that." Right. And so as I was sharing, like all this was going on, and we didn't have a donor, but my family was connecting. My children were seeing people showing love and extending themselves. We were seeing people getting matches, like there was joy to be experienced. And so I said to these people on this Zoom event, this call, I said, here's the deal. This is what I want to be said about me. I don't know if tomorrow is going to happen for me. Tomorrow may not come, but I want people to remember that the day before I passed, I had a smile on my face because I'm not leaving here with a frown on my face. And that's how we have to be in the midst of strife, in the midst of stress. Find the joy.
Yes. And as a part of your regimen through many of you went through an incredible journey in and out of hospitals and different things that happened. You talked once about, reading the Bible in the morning and getting up and stretching and walking and putting in music, listening to Dwayne Woods and Marvin
Uh-huh.
Sapp, Donnie McClurkin. And you write in your book, "As I walked and listened, my spirit soared. I sensed victory. I felt
Yes.
like I was somehow both in and yet beyond my situation. Like the cancer was a part of my life journey, but not my entire journey. I felt like I was going through something, a big something, but that something was not how my life would be defined. I felt like there was so much more to me, and the cancer just added another dimension." I
Oh
love,
God, I love you. Right. I'm
I
like,
love,
that was it. That sense of, because when people get the cancer diagnosis, they feel like that's the life sentence.
mhm,
And I didn't know if I was going to live or die. But what I realized was God was helping me to appreciate, even if this is the final chapter,
mhm,
it's all about how you live this chapter,
mhm, mhm.
right? And so we're going to remember, even if it's your final, they're not going to remember that you went out, like, woe is me. They're going to remember you went out just praising God and feeling blessed at every turn despite your circumstances,
Yeah. And
even because of yours.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off.
no, 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 no. Talk to me.
Yeah, because you write in another point, when my time comes, and I guess you had started to journal or write. You were writing letters to your children. You were writing letters, and you realized, hey, I've been writing letters to my children in the event that I don't get through this, but I need to write some to my husband. And you were just writing letters and writing. And another of the things that jumped out to my heart, it says, when my time comes, I hope somebody will say she sought to fulfill his purpose and to love and be loved. Her life was full of love, and it ended when his purpose for her was fulfilled. She thanked God for her journey, every part of it. I just love that. Loved it, loved it, loved it. This is a great book. I'm telling you, if you're watching now, you want to definitely get Jennifer Jones Austin's book. It tells the important part of her journey, and it will resonate with yours about trusting God and trusting the process. It's called Consider It Pure Joy. There was one more that I wanted to read, and then I want to double back to your work, and which I think it blew my mind. That's the riveting part.
Well, I'm just going to quickly tell you, you blew my mind when I was at Greater Christ, and I saw you leading the music ministry, and I mean, just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful ministry and music, and just I actually have some footage from that day, and it's not of me, it's of you leading the choir. I remember so well.
Oh, bless you.
Tremendous.
I'm trying to. It was something that you told Channing. I had it marked. I can't find it right now.
It was about the goldfish.
It was about the goldfish. I think I just found it. Thank you so much. On Saturday, November 14th, the day before I was to go into the hospital for my first consolidation treatment, everyone in the house woke up to Channing's frantic cry. He was hysterical. His pet goldfish had died, and he was distraught. He asked why the goldfish died. He wondered what he had done wrong. And can you share with us what you told him?
So he was 7. Here we were in a situation where I'd survived the first bout with cancer. The cancer had gone into remission because of the chemo, but the doctors, as we talked about, said that if I didn't get a bone marrow transplant, then the chemo would stop working at a certain point and would likely bring about my death. And so because these kids knew that I was told that I would likely die, and they were brought into the hospital to say goodbye to me, even though I survived that first go round and I've been able to come out of the hospital after being there for about 5.5, 6 weeks, there was still this sense of, we're not out of the woods and we don't know what's going to happen. And I was really anxious about how they'd manage that. And like I said a few minutes ago, I just thought, I've got a 12-year-old and a 7-year-old. And if God takes me, which he, if I'm done, if my work is done, if he takes me, how are they going to understand that and experience that? And I was worried, are they going to be angry with God? Will they be mad with him? And I was especially concerned about that because I was thinking they haven't yet developed their own relationship with God. They don't really understand how God works. And so they're going to turn from him because he's taken their mother. So here's what happens. This is my worry. And I've got to go back into the hospital for consolidation chemotherapy. And the day before I've got to go back in, we wake up and Channing is like hysterical because the goldfish has died. So I go into his bedroom and I get down on the floor with him. And I say to him words that I am certain that God gave to me for that moment. I said, because they came out of nowhere, I said, I believe God gives us life to fulfill his purposes. And when we fulfilled them, he calls us home, not a second before or not a moment after. When we've done all that God intends for us to do, our work is done and he calls us home. And I went on to say to him, because we were doing these donor drives and he saw what was going on, I said to him, it's not that you fed the goldfish too much. And it's not that you didn't feed it enough. It's not that you changed its water too much or you didn't change it enough. I wanted him to understand that it was nothing that he did or did not do. Because I wanted him to understand that if mommy died, it wasn't that we didn't do enough donor drives or that we didn't do, or we did too many drives. When it's your turn, when you've done all that you are supposed to do, you fulfilled your purposes and God called you home. So I told him this story. And the beautiful thing was that that little boy, and this is not an exaggeration, from that moment forward, at dinner time, at nighttime when he was being put to bed with his prayers, he would say, "Dear Lord, please don't take mommy. But if you do, we know that it's because she's fulfilled her purpose."
Wow. And mommy is still here and still fulfilling her purpose because
I pray.
there were no 13 among, there were no donors among the 13,000, but there was a miracle for you. Will you tell us about that?
Absolutely. This is like the what? So I shared with you all that God spoke to me when I was in law school. Didn't like just happen, like wound up in law school, not knowing what I wanted to do or to be. And he said, "I want you to work on behalf of my children, my vulnerable children, the children who need somebody on the ground advocating for them, being a support for them." So that's the work that I do right up to the moment I get sick. It's the work that I'm now blessed to do after being sick. But I'm doing this work and I get sick. We learned that I have leukemia. I need a bone marrow transplant. I need someone to give me their good blood and bone marrow to cure me of this disease. Siblings are, tested, they don't match. 8 million people in the registry, and they don't match. 13,000 people brought to the registry, and still they don't match. And why? Because God had something just for me, just for me, just for me. The doctors told me in January, 4 months after I come down with leukemia, that they'd identified cord blood. Cord blood. Cord blood is the cord blood that is extracted from the umbilical cord blood of babies when they're born. And cord blood has life-saving purposes and treatment possibilities. Cord blood can generate new blood and bone marrow systems. So they tell me they've identified cord blood. And I am transplant. And I learned that the cord blood came from babies, two babies born in New York City public hospitals. Now, here in New York City and around the country, most often the babies that are born in public hospitals are born to people who don't have the resources and the means. They don't have private insurance. Two little boys. And are you ready? African American baby boys. As I tell people all the time, the children in this nation who are marginalized, ostracized, dejected, rejected, the ones who are carrying the burden from slavery forward 400 years later, Black boys. And it was as though God said, "I want you to work on behalf of my vulnerable children. And when the time comes, you're working to save my children. But when the time comes for someone to save you, I'm not sending your siblings. I'm not sending 8 million people in that registry. No, I'm not bringing those 13,000 adults. I'm sending the baby boys, the children, to help save you."
Wow.
And sometimes people say to me, it's just like God did when he sent his son Jesus and the blood.
Wow. Wow.
So I tell people all the time, you don't know how God's working in your life. You don't know what he's doing and when he's doing it and why he's doing it. But all you need to do is trust him.
Mm-hmm.
Trust him and trust this process, this thing called life, and the ups and downs that you experience, the highs, the lows, the mountains and the valleys, because there's something in it, every little bit of it. There's something that is building, something that is preparing you for when that next challenge comes. My journey with cancer prepared me for COVID. It allows me to move through this moment and understand God's in control. He's got this process. All I have to do is trust him, and I'm gonna be all right.
I love it. That was the part that blew my mind. The very purpose and call that God had called you to, he used to be a miracle for you. That's why I say the story is riveting. It has not left me from that day. And it makes me say, trust God. And if you do, trust the process.
Right.
I love,
No,
go ahead.
Mark, know that he didn't just do it for me. He's doing it every day for each and every one of us. Right? I'm not alone. And even if things didn't turn out as we planned, some good still came of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I look at my children right now and how they move through the world. And I know it's because of what we endured as a family. Trust them.
Yeah. I was going to ask you that. How has your family changed, grown, the relationships deepened going through this? And I'm sure you just said it, but that time prepared you all, I'm sure, for COVID now. You have already gone
Right. You know,
similar
I've got an
storms, having
18-year-old
to
boy.
isolate and things of that nature. You've already
Yeah.
seen all of that.
Right. I've got an 18-year-old boy, and he graduated from high school and is going to college, and um, uh, like worked very hard in school, and very fortunate. He did very well in school, and he also plays baseball, and he's top athlete, top academic. He was being recruited for the MLB,
Wow.
and COVID came and shut all that down. But this boy has not been deterred. He just keeps pressing. And I realize it's because he saw that, when the storms hit,
Mm-hmm.
don't give in to them. Ride them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And show who's in command. My daddy used to preach. Everybody goes through storms. You're either in one, coming out of one, or about to go through one.
Yeah.
And what makes all the difference is how you live your faith in the midst.
Mm-hmm.
Do you take faith in the storm with you, or do you go by yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Do you call on your faith while you're in the middle of it, or do you just just woe is me, where is God, where is God? Right? When you come out of it, do you praise him for having brought you through? It's all a matter of how you show up with your faith in these moments, and that'll take you through the storm.
Absolutely. We're coming up to the hour. And when I think about, there's another part in the book that talks, poignantly about trusting the process. You had a social worker who you had met before at a point where you were frustrated because you had been going through in and out of the hospital, going back and forth. And she asked you, who do you trust? Can you tell us that story?
So here it is, and I'm gonna show my bias. I'm just gonna be honest. An Indian woman
Mm-hmm.
who comes to a hospital bed, my hospital bed, and I've been in and out of the hospital. I'm through transplant, but my body's going through rejection of the transplant. And there are these moments where it's like, am I going to live? Am I not going to live? And you have a 50% chance of survival with transplant. And I'm exhausted. I'm getting angry. I'm mad. I want to be home. I want to get on with life. And I don't know what's going on. I'm human, right? And so she sees me. She learns that I'm spiraling. And she comes in, this social worker, and she sits across from me and she says, asks me a series of questions, and I answer back. And, my background working in child welfare, I kind of get a sense of how social workers show up in the space. So I'm answering all of her questions, and I'm like, I got this. And then she says, who do you trust? What is this woman, this social worker? Like, I've never heard a social worker say, who do you trust? And I'm thinking, and she, like, I'm not looking, if she was like if she was a sister or, a brother, I might be like, oh, she's asking me about God. I had no idea. So, like, I didn't have an answer. And then she asked again. And I was like, and this finally I blurted out, I said, I trust God. And I was angry when I said, I trust God. And she said very calmly, well, if you trust God, then why don't you trust this process? And when she said that, I was like, whoa. And I mean, even as I shared with you right now, I'm thinking about how I felt in that moment and how I feel in this moment. Mm-hmm. Right. And I thought to myself, if I trust God, then I must trust the process. If I understand that there's nothing that he will allow me to experience that ultimately is not for my good. There's nothing that he's going to allow me to go through that doesn't grow me, mature me, make me and those around me better for it. So if I've got to experience another, down moment, if we in this COVID have got to go through another surge, right? If we've got to be on lockdown or not live the way that we want to live, it's because it's part of the process. We got to go through this. Unfortunately, there's going to be some more suffering because only when we go through this do we get to where he needs us and wants us to be. It's only through the continual suffering that we grow and we mature in our faith and in our trust. It's good stuff.
Great stuff. I want to raise one more part of the book where in some of the letters that you wrote to your children, one of the things that, again, of many things that jump out to me, Jennifer, you say you can amass all the wealth and fame this world holds. But if you deny yourself the joy and reward of helping another, your life will feel and be meaningless. And so, as we're at the top of the hour, Jennifer Jones Austin, if you will just look into the camera and talk to people who might not be at a place where they understand having joy even in difficult times and connecting that to helping others, how it brings value and meaning to your life. Certainly from reading your book, I know it has.
Absolutely.
But if you can
So,
just share with those that are listening.
absolutely. In my book, at one point, I write about how I was listening to a sermon that my father gave, where at his kind of the climax, at the high point, he says, "Don't you know He didn't save you for your sake? He saved you for the kingdom's sake." Mm-hmm. So this understanding and appreciation that we are here, just as we saw with Jesus, we are here to lift up, serve, and support others. And just yesterday, somebody said to me, "What does success look like to you?" Mm-hmm. And I said, "I believe that living my best life is helping others to live their best lives." Mm-hmm. Getting so much joy out of figuring out ways of creating opportunity and leaning in and helping others to see themselves and their worth, even when they're struggling. Even when everything looks like it's not what it should be or what you desire it is, but just finding joy in service, right? Servant leadership. Mm-hmm. And so my work through the years has rewarded me in that way, and it has helped me to see that just as God rewarded me and blessed me, that there's more that I'm going to grow. That I'm going to grow not from the car that I drive or from the house that I live in, but being able to give and live and love and serve. And so I believe that living my best life is helping other people live their best lives. And as long as I'm here, I'm going to try to do it. And I can't thank you enough, Marcus, for this moment, for this gift that you've given to me. You didn't have to, but you did.
Well, as I stated, I promised this audience that I would bring them exceptional humans. And again, from just the one time I made your acquaintance, I have not forgotten the great testimony of Jennifer Jones Austin and just the privilege that it has informed my life about living more closely to the center of my passion and considering it really pure joy. It has been a pure joy to have you on. I hope to have you back and talk more.
I'll come back. We just hang out.
Yep. And talk more about your work, which I mean, all of the influential work that you're doing with children. And I just, there are so many young people that I just would point to you to say, because even one of my nieces is aspiring to go to law school. And she's like, which area will I go in? I want to make a difference.
People send them my way.
Yeah, people need to see people making a difference so that you're awakened that we're all called. We're all called to it. And when the storms of life happen, we still got to trust the process, that those are somehow part of the providence that brings us to progress and purpose. And so you are such a fitting and shining example of that. I'm so grateful that you were able to work.
God be all the glory.
All the glory, honor, and praise. Amen. Thank you so much, Jennifer Jones Austin. The book. I know I got it on Amazon.
You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Amazon.
Okay, is that the preferred way?
Yep, it's the easiest way. Thank
It's,
you.
yeah, and we can follow you on social media.
Yep.
On
You can follow me. I'm at Pure Joy for Twitter. I don't tweet as much. I'm on Instagram, Jennifer Jones Austin, and Facebook, Jennifer Jones Austin.
Okay. And I got to, before I let you go, the Democratic National Convention was this week. What do you think about Senator Harris being the vice presidential candidate?
I think it's a great moment in our nation's history. I think that this trust God, trust the process. The fact that we are in the 100th year of the ratification of the woman's right to vote, and just to bring it further home, that Black women, or that white women were saying, Black women, step back. And Black women were the ones who helped deliver the 19th Amendment, giving all women the right to vote. That here we are in the 100th year commemorating that a Black woman is the vice president nominee for the Democrat Party. Like, I can't help but be excited. I cannot help but be excited. I believe that it's an uphill battle, nonetheless, and I'm very much always cognizant of the fact that we've got some issues and challenges ahead of us in the 2016 election. White women, the majority of them, voted for Donald Trump. They voted against a white woman becoming the first president of the United States of America. And so that concerns me, because when as I just said, go from the women's suffragist movement, where white women try to get Black women to step back, to 2016, when they wouldn't even bring in one of their own. I'm anxious. I'm anxious that, they might be like, first female vice president, a Black woman, potentially the first female president. And, they may go and fill out those mail-in ballots, or may not vote at all, or may go and fill out those grids if they go and show up. And, they might do what they did in 2016 and what they did in, 1919, 1920. So I'm just being honest. That's a fear of mine. And then I'm concerned about young people who said that Kamala Harris was not their choice. I'm just being honest. White and Black and other. And, and there are Black people who felt that Kamala Harris was not the choice for president because of some of her past. And so, I'm just hoping that in this moment, we don't want to ignore that, and we've got to deal with that and confront that. And, we've got to be accountable about, how we're going to handle criminal justice as we go forward, which was the big issue that people have with her. But I don't think it compares to whether or not we're going to have a democracy to begin with. Whether or not we're going to have somebody who's going to try to blow us up by any means necessary, somebody who lies and cheats and is all about self, somebody who is engaging in practices that are causing our lives, us to lose lives at every turn. So I don't think the two are on the same level. And I think that we just got to lean in, and we've got to help those who are still raising questions to say, come on now, this is not the time. We've got to unite. And we got to get that man out of there. So I'm being a little partisan, but that's where I am right now. And maybe it's not partisan, it's just being real.
Yeah. And I hope that when they're thinking about prison reform and crime revision, that she taps you, because I think that God has perfectly situated you through your experiences to see ways with unique perspectives that we need to put into place. So I hope that,
I just want him to use me in the way that he sees fit.
Yeah.
Thank you
so much for being with us today. I really appreciate you. And thank you, everybody who's watching on YouTube, on Facebook, on LinkedIn. Appreciate you all. Share this content. Everybody should purchase her book. You can get it on Amazon, and you should share this content widely for others who want to live in the center of their passion. Jennifer Jones Austin, Esquire. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.